Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis is saying that he is not going to not going to be ordering COVID-19 vaccines for young children. This is even after the FDA unanimously endorsed Pfizer and Moderna shots for babies and children under the age of 5 years old. So he's saying Florida, you can see it in that Politico headline there, is, quote, affirmatively against COVID-19 vaccines for young kids. Ryan, Rand Paul pressed Dr. Fauci on this yesterday, and Fauci basically admitted that there isn't all of the evidence yet to suggest we do know, to borrow a phrase, affirmatively, that the vaccines are effective for people in a certain age cohort. What do you make of DeSantis standing with this decision down in Florida, at least just on the state level, not the national level?
Right, and as he added, he's not banning people from getting it, although I could see like a push eventually in that direction. But right now he's saying, look, it's a personal choice. If you want to give your kid under 5 the vaccine, the FDA has now approved it. So you can get it, through a doctor or through some other mechanism, but Florida is not going to be kind of helping assist in that direction. And I think one of the points that Fauci was making here is that because, and particularly this new variant, is so mild relative to previous variants, and also mild when it comes to the people under 5.
Yep.
Like people who are there are still a lot of people who are very real risk, and people are still dying of this. But people who are 6 months to 5 years old have such mild cases that in order for the vaccine to be proven effective, it has to demonstrably make those mild cases even milder without having any side effects that counteract how. So even if the vaccine gives you a little fever, it gives a certain percentage of kids a little fever, you're like, well, the virus gave a fever to X percentage. So you start comparing it, and then if you pull in long COVID and say, well, you're less like, let's say that you agree that you're less likely to have long-term implications from the vaccine than from getting the virus. We don't have enough data for either of those questions yet, because it's only 2022.
Right.
And this thing came in 2020. So how are we going to know what the effect is 5 years from now?
And long COVID and long mRNA, by the way, is still something that I've heard from parents. It just it's that lingering concern that we don't know what these mRNA vaccines are going to do 30 years down the road, 40 years down the road, and we only have 2 years, not even 2 years, of them being in use. And people are still existentially nervous about not knowing the answer to that question. Whether or not you think there's good science bearing out the safety in the long term, which a lot of scientists obviously do think there is, you can understand why parents in particular would be nervous about infants and toddlers.
And it'd be one thing if it was the type of vaccine where you take it and then you don't get.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
But that's not the type of vaccine we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with the type of vaccine where it reduces the severity of your symptoms.
Right.
Like that seems to be pretty well accepted. There are plenty of people who are like going to scoff at that, but that's broadly accepted at this point, that it's likely to reduce the severity of your symptoms. Do we know how that relates to long COVID? There are some efforts to figure out whether or not your symptoms and how severe they are correlated with whether or not you're going to wind up with long COVID. But those studies aren't conclusive at this point yet. You have some people say, you can actually have a mild case and then you can have long COVID. You can have a terrible case and not have long COVID. Mm-hmm. And so I do think it's fair to say, leave this to parents at this point.
And what he's saying is literally just that we're not going to have any state programs pushing this. He's saying you can do it if you want, as you noted. And I want to be clear, I didn't mean to conflate what DeSantis was talking about with what Fauci was talking about, and Senator Paul were talking about.
What were they talking about?
So Paul asked him if there is enough evidence to prove that booster shots actually lower the rate of hospitalization or death in children. And Fauci's response was, right now, there's not enough data that has been accumulated, Senator Paul, to indicate that's the case. So it's about boosters, but I think the same kind of principle applies. I mean, we've said that it's been approved by the companies that stand to make money off of it, and we have research that indicates it's at least safe. But again, Ron DeSantis, I don't know why this is controversial for him simply to say we're leaving it up to parents. There's not a ton of evidence that this is going to have widespread severity or going to spread from infants and toddlers in a way that is like incredibly detrimental. I genuinely don't understand why this is controversial. If anything, to me, it sounds like a good way to handle it.
Right, and the booster question is kind of is a similar version of what I was saying. So it's like, imagine that you are comparing 1,000 7-year-olds who are vaccinated with 1,000 7-year-olds who are vaccinated and boosted.
Yeah.
And then you try to compare the severity of the symptoms of those who get COVID against each other. And you can imagine that you're very unlikely to see significant enough differences, because the 7-year-olds who are vaccinated are generally going to have a pretty mild case, and if a few of them have some reaction to the vaccine, then you factor that against the ones who did slightly better. And so you can imagine why Fauci would say we don't have data yet accumulated that proves that doing this is effective. And also, they haven't yet kind of recalibrated the vaccine for this variant. Like that was when it originally came out. They're like that's the genius of mRNA, and to their credit, they whipped this thing together extremely fast. People were saying it takes 5 years for a vaccine or whatever. Boom, like they had it.
It's warp speed.
Super fast. It's Operation Warp Speed.
Aptly named.
And then they're like, and we can tweak it to follow the variants. But they're not. Like, I mean, maybe eventually they will, but we're 2 years in and they haven't done that yet. And so, given that this variant is different than the one that the vaccine was originally engineered for, that probably also makes it harder for Fauci to accumulate that data.
Well, yeah, and one of the problems, as I understand it, is that the sample size in children is really difficult to get to a good place because severe COVID is very rare in young children. So just to get a sample size and then compare groups, that's control groups to compare it to, is a really difficult thing with children. And that's another thing for parents who follow this really closely and are sort of in the granular details of the studies that makes them nervous, and I would say reasonably so. I mean, we're not able to test this in ways that people are comfortable with, so it makes sense. I mean, if you want to do it for your child, do it, but I think not pouring an immense amount of state resources into something, it shouldn't be a controversial decision.
Right, if you're going to spend money on child welfare, on child health, there are a lot of ways you can do it that are going to have a lot more demonstrable upsides for kids.
This, by the way, is all set against the backdrop of Fauci, who has 2 doses of the vaccine and 2 boosters. I believe he has 2 boosters, having COVID right now, which whatever
he was testifying with COVID, right?
Yeah.
Hanging in.
And exactly. And
he'll do the whole, it would have been worse without the vaccine.
Whatever you think of Fauci. He might be
right. Statistically, he's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't know about individual cases, but yeah.
Whatever you think of Fauci, it's, again, that is a hit to this idea that everybody, like, when we talk about vaccines, we have meant one very particular thing for the history of vaccine technology. And if it's unthinkable, if you had told somebody back in 2019 when this was all being developed, and the narrative was that this is our key, this is it, that somebody would have 4 doses of the vaccine and would still catch COVID, everyone would have been really confused. We would have been like, then what are we doing?
We used to call those breakthrough cases.
Yeah.
But we don't really even call them that now. We just call them cases.
Just cases. Yeah. Well, yeah, we've both had COVID since being vaccinated. Yeah, it happens. And hope everybody is staying safe out there.
Yeah. I got mine in style, though. How'd you get yours?
I don't know. I actually don't know. Yours was really easy, though. If someone did tracking and was like, all right, Ryan, where have you been?
Let's see, Madison Square Garden.
At a fish show. Oh, man. Well, we'll have more Rising for you right after this.